Welcome, everyone. Good evening. I'm Debbie Barton Grant. I am the Executive Vice President and CEO of the Jewish Federation of Greater Indianapolis. And on behalf of myself and Beth Clapper, our Federation President, I want to welcome you. Our officers are excited that you're all with us tonight. And this is just going to be a wonderful evening for you to learn a little bit about our new community security program that we are launching this week. I just want to give you a little bit of housekeeping. This is a Zoom webinar. You will be muted unless you have a question, in which case you should type your question in the Q&A tab down at the bottom, and we will try to get your call on, but we're also going to try to be respectful of the hour time that was set for the webinar. Before we introduce our panelists tonight, I want to start off with a poll question. So you're going to see a box with one question pop up on your screen, and then we're going to give you a minute to answer the question, and then we will share the results. So the question, have you or anyone in your household experienced anti-Semitism in the last year? I'll let everybody take a couple moments to answer it, and then we'll get the results for the poll. Are those still coming in? All right, so 52% of the people on our webinar tonight said yes, that they or a member of their household have experienced anti-Semitism over the past 5 years. 48% said no. Those numbers may shock some of you, but according to our Indianapolis Jewish community study that we did a year ago, 2 years ago now, 1/3 of our Indianapolis Jewish community youth experienced anti-Semitism. There was a 110% increase in anti-Semitism across 6 Midwestern states from a recent Anti-Defamation League study. The sharp rise in hate crimes and anti-Semitic attacks and rhetoric throughout the world has left the Jewish community with grave concerns about individual and community safety. This increase in anti-Semitism has led to us once again to reassess our needs and financial investment in security across our Jewish community. The Jewish Federation, our synagogues and agencies are focused on a proactive approach that takes into its organizational missions. This is something our community has been working on for close to 2 years now.
Thanks, Debbie. We feel strongly that we cannot engage or educate our community in our Jewish spaces if we don't feel secure in them. We're undertaking an effort with Secure Community Network, or SCN, to launch a community security initiative called Safe Indy. The Secure Community Network, or SCN, is a nonprofit 501c3 and is the official safety and security organization of the Jewish Community of North America, or JFNA, our parent organization. Founded in 2004 under the auspices of the Jewish Federation of North America and the Conference of Presidents of Major American Jewish Organizations. SCN works on behalf of 146 federations, 50 of the largest Jewish nonprofit organizations in North America, and over 300 independent communities, as well as other partners in the public, private, nonprofit, and academic sectors to ensure the safety and security and resiliency of the Jewish people. We could not have done this initiative without our entire community's support. We would really like to thank and acknowledge our partners in this security effort: Hooverwood, the Jewish Community Relations Council, or JCRC, our Jewish Community Center, Congregation Beth-El Zedek, Indianapolis Hebrew Congregation, Etz Chaim Sephardic Congregation, AE Pi Fraternity, ZBT Fraternity, Congregation Beth Shalom, Congregation Sherry Tefillah, Haston Hebrew Academy of Indianapolis, Goldman Union Camp or Gucci, and the Chabad Center for Jewish Life. Without these organizations and the support from our very own community, we could not have been able to bring to you our new Community Security Director, Grant Mendenhall. And I want to take a minute and welcome Grant. He's joined us obviously on this panel, and I want to give you a little bit of Grant's background. It's very impressive, and we're thrilled to have him. Grant is an Indiana native and comes with 30 years experience at the FBI. Most recently, he served as the special agent in charge of the Indianapolis division. Prior to Indianapolis, Grant served as the Assistant Director of Counterterrorism Division at FBI headquarters in Washington, D.C. He has extremely strong and close relationships here in Indianapolis and with the Indiana law enforcement communities and emergency preparedness. Thank you, Grant, for being here, and we look forward to your comments later.
Thank you, Beth. I hope you'll all indulge me for just a moment because I want you all to understand how incredibly lucky we are in our Jewish community here in Indianapolis, all of our partners and also our partners at SCN to have Grant on board. We will post his bio for you all to take a look at, but Grant's 30 years of experience has spanned from his time in Cuba at Guantanamo Bay to the Interagency Counterterrorism Intelligence Section, working on the 2002 Olympic Winter Games. He is just an incredible professional, and we are so lucky to have him working with us and helping us to secure our Jewish community and to keep it safe. Along with hearing from Grant, we also have a special panel on the call tonight. Mark Jardina, who is the Assistant Deputy Director of SCN's Regional Security and Community Engagement Programs. Stuart Frisch, who is the Regional Security Director in Memphis. Robert Graves, who is the Regional Security Director of Washington, D.C. and Greater Washington. And Jean Moss, the Regional Security Director for Portland. Thank you all for taking the time to join us tonight and to be on this call. Part of Grant's responsibilities once he gets started as Safe Indy's Community Security Director, he will be developing a strategic approach to community security. He'll provide customized support to Jewish institutions, including facility assessments and emergency planning and preparedness. He will establish practices and protocols for community-wide collaboration and, most importantly, communication, and implement security training programs. I cannot be more committed to making sure that Grant is successful in our community, and thank you, Grant. We're looking forward to working with you. Grant, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, thanks, Debbie and Beth and Jeff and all my partners from the SCN team that are on the panel. First, Debbie, you're far too kind. I really appreciate your comments. And to everybody, looks like we got over 100 participants on the call, which is great to see tonight. To everybody that's on the call in the community, just a couple of points I wanted to make to all of you. First is to express how excited I am to be a part of the team here at the Federation and to be a part of the team with the Secure Community Network and the nationwide and truly global network that SCN represents. This is a very humbling experience for me, as Debbie and the other members of the team on the panel know. I've had some fairly extensive experience in my career working with the Jewish community here in the United States and fairly significantly overseas in Israel as well. And over those experiences, I've gained a very healthy respect for the Jewish community and an affinity for the Jewish community. So it's very, I guess, poetic for me to, at this point in my professional life, to now be working with the Jewish community on a full-time basis in this capacity. So I'm I'm thrilled about it. I could not be happier to be here. And I'm really looking forward to meeting as many people in the community as I can in as short a period of time as I can. Obviously, we're going to be challenged in many ways with the virtual environment that we're working in primarily now, but we're going to do our best to move this program forward as quickly as we can. So I think in the next 30 to 60 days, you can expect to hear quite a bit about this program from both myself and the rest of the executive team here at the Federation. And you can expect me to be around, at least virtually, meeting members, stakeholders in the Jewish community, members of the leadership team, and a lot of things will be happening through those communications in the background to kind of establish a foundation for the security program going forward. So again, Debbie and the rest of the team, thank you for your confidence in me. Thank you for the warm welcome throughout the course of this week. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mark Jardina from Secure Community Network.
So I have to remember not to follow Grant anymore in any of these presentations. He's impossible to follow. Just a little bit about me, a little bit more about SCN and this program and how we came to this place. You know, SCN's been around for give or take 12 to 14 years, and it obviously started as a small group of individuals working to provide security and protection and guidance for the Jewish community across North America. About 2.5 years ago, our new CEO, Michael Masters, who I'm sure everyone has heard his name, took over the organization and implemented a lot of amazing things that have really brought us to the forefront of security in partnership with law enforcement, federal law enforcement, local law enforcement, intelligence sectors across the US. And one of those things that he did was start an embedded security director program, starting with Memphis as the pilot program, if you will. You'll hear from Stuart Frisch here in a little bit. But with that and proving that model as far as implementing best practices response standard across the community, it grew, and it grew quickly. And we have since grown in the past 2 years to roughly 12 different communities across the US, with more and more interest gaining. Moreover, we've connected with a lot of these security directors, all of the security directors across the US that work independently of SCN, but with directly for their respective federations. And it's just been an absolutely amazing experience along the way. And we've seen a lot of growth, not just from relationships with law enforcement and response capabilities, but with the community and how the Jewish community across the US now is now taking a larger part in organizational programs, training, assessments, national grant programs, and just the growth of that and how the communities come together to rally around something that we can all identify with. With that, one of the things that I wanted to talk about, and you'll hear from some of my colleagues across the US, is how a lot of this, if not all of it, is truly community driven. Some of the things you're going to see in the very near future through grants programming and through the Federation is the forming of a community security committee. These are representatives from each organization across the Indianapolis community that will represent the guidance, direction, information passing, and truly bring the community around the security program, and then disseminate information down. So executives, rabbis, security chairs for your respective security committees. If you don't already have a security committee within your organization, Grant will be working with you to help form them. I should really just flash Grant's cell phone number across the screen here and pass it out to everybody. But you know, these are all the things that are going to be put in place. And I can't stress enough how, you know, a lot of times as an organization, as a community, we wait for someone else to organize that first security committee, to organize the organizational committee, or to ask for training, or to present training or an opportunity for the congregation, for the members to come around and be a part of that. But it's so important that the general members of the community, the congregants, the members, out there are driving this and working with their respective organizations, your synagogue, your JCC, your Jewish day school, whatever that may be, and saying, look, we need this, we want to be a part of this. because we can't do what we do effectively without your participation, without that. And we find a lot that, a lot of it is also driven by fear and a lack of information. And that's part of what Grant will provide, and what we aim to provide in a lot of our communities is disseminating information, threat-based information, opportunities for training, opportunities for assessments, education around that. And we truly we combat that fear through training and education. And we found this to be a very effective model going forward. And we really look forward to working with the Indianapolis community. I'm excited to get up there. As Grant mentioned, in this current environment, in the COVID-19 environment, the approach is going to be slightly different. Normally, we would be having a town hall where everybody would be invited, and we'd all be standing up on a stage or and talking to everybody and fielding questions and really talking about the things to come. With this current environment, this virtual environment, we're going to use it to our advantage and be able to lay the foundation for this program. And this comes through some of the things that I just mentioned when it comes to organizational security committees, organizational security plans, community-wide security plans, so that there is a response, a central response in the event of a crisis or an incident. Mass communication, all of these extra tools that are going to be out there for you able to use or able to take part in and that you'll benefit from. So Grant's going to be laying that foundation over the coming weeks, so that when this COVID-19 environment lifts and he can get back out there and in front of everybody, he'll be able to hit the ground at a full sprint by that point in time. With that, just a quick housekeeping issue before I pass this on to one of my colleagues. There is a Q&A box. If you do have any questions about the program, things you want to see, any comments, by all means, please put them in the Q&A box. After I'm done speaking, I will be monitoring that. We will get to your questions at the end. Any questions that we don't get to, we'll try to pull the transcript and be able to get this out via communication if there's anything specific that we don't get to in there. Next, you're going to be hearing from a couple of my colleagues across the U.S. To start with is Stuart Frisch. I'll let him introduce himself, but he was the very first embedded security program that we had with the organization. They're going to be talking to you a little bit about some of the things that they've experienced, not just during this COVID-19 environment, but also when they started up their programs, what was successful, how they were able to gain the interest of the community and some of the things they were willing to implement and able to implement, and all very successfully. These are some great guys, and I'm proud to work with them. So with that, I will introduce you to Stuart Frisch, our regional security advisor in Memphis, and one of my personal mentors as I took this job. He stopped me from losing my mind, and he's been there for me along the way. Stuart.
Thank you, Mark. I appreciate it. Good evening, everybody. My name is Stuart Frisch. I'm speaking to you from the Jewish community in Memphis, Tennessee. Just a quick demographic note on the Jewish community in Memphis. Memphis is, at last census, about 14,000 Jews, and we have 13 agencies in our Jewish community. And like Mark said, Memphis was the first pilot when in early 2018, when Secure Community Network went from a central office in New York to creating a real network across this country that takes the Jewish communities all over our country and connects them and truly creates the Jewish concept of Kehillah. And as we've had a lot of experience, a lot of good experience so far in building these security programs. I found that the security programs in communities such as Indianapolis, such as Memphis, and some of our other cities across the country are built on a couple things, which I think that you're going to be really in great hands with your new community security director. The first thing is, Mark kind of touched on it briefly, is the Community Security Committee. There is a Community Security Committee in Memphis that consists of members of every agency in Memphis. We have members of the FBI, local and state law enforcement, as well as non-voting members. Every agency is represented, both lay leadership as well as professional leadership. And we get together on a regular basis. We talk through the problems. We decide on what the trajectory of our Community Security Committee is going to be. And what this does is this creates ownership. And I think that ownership being pushed down to the very lowest level, ownership being pushed down to our families and to our entire community as a whole is one of the things that I think is one of the greatest benefits of these security programs that SCN is creating across the country. And I think that Grant's going to be highly successful in creating this community security committee. Relationships with law enforcement. I mean, you've got a 30-year law enforcement executive as your security director. The metaphor that we like to use at Secure Community Network when we talk about things like relationships with law enforcement and our plans and our crisis communication plans and our emergency operation plans is a metaphor from the Bible. We say we like to build the ark before the rain. And that ark looks different depending on what we're talking about. And in this case, our relationships with law enforcement, especially on that tragic morning of the 27th of October, 2018, on that Shabbat morning, we found that the equity that we put into those relationships paid dividends and is continuing to pay dividends. And I think that you have the absolute best case scenario with your new security director because he's a law enforcement professional, both at the national, state, and local level. And I really think that that's going to be one of the cornerstones of your ongoing security plan. You're going to see training that will level set and provide every member of this community with the tools, not only to respond post-incident, but to help prevent incidents from happening. And I really think that that's one of the greatest gifts that this organization provides is the sense of pikuach nefesh, is the sense of protecting human life, because we're all living in a different world. I like to mention that the synagogue I grew up in Memphis, Tennessee, didn't have locks on the doors. And of course, now we know we're living in a much different world. And I look forward to working hand in hand with your new community security director and hand in hand with your community. I think that this is a fantastic start. I'd like to pass the virtual microphone over, if I may now, to Mr. Robert Graves, who serves as our regional security advisor in the National Capital Region. Robert.
Thank you, Stuart. I'm Robert Graves. I'm the regional security advisor here in the Greater Washington area, working with the Jewish Federation of Greater Washington. We are the largest community in the SCAN family right now. Our community is 300,000 strong, 300 organizations across Southern Maryland, the District of Columbia, and Northern Virginia. We have, even despite its size, it's really not that much different from your community. There's just more of everything. And we face those challenges on a large level, but the same challenges Grant will be dealing with every day, we're dealing with here as well. I came to SCAN this past fall after a long career with the FBI, just like Grant. Had a brief foray into the private sector, doing some consulting for the U.S. government before I picked up the reins from Mr. Jardina as he moved on to bigger and better things with SCN. He left me behind a great portfolio to work with. One of the best things he'd done for me is he'd gotten our federation started on a security task force. For the last 6 months, I've worked with that task force as it has moved forward in identifying and developing the concepts for a truly communal security program here in the Metro Washington area, very much like you are creating there in Indianapolis. In the meantime, hand in glove with that, the second best thing Mark did for me was get me a deputy. Right away, I was able to bring on a second individual, a very experienced fellow from background with the Department of State Security and Marine Corps Security as well. And together we have tackled the challenges here in our area. It's been grant season up until very lately. The federal nonprofit security grant program application season just winds up on Friday, as many of you are aware. We spend a lot of our time doing assessments for the synagogues and other agencies and organizations in our community. And we're continuing to wrap those up even in the COVID-19 era. We're finishing up those reports, polishing them, and getting them into those grant applications, and continuing to review grant applications for our constituency here as well. We've also done quite a bit of training. We find training is the single best investment we can often make is preparation of individuals, which leads to a prepared organization, prepared synagogue, prepared agency, which in the end makes our community overall safer and more secure. We've identified quite a different set of needs from organization to organization, though, around the community, from small synagogues that are maybe just beginning to think about these things and maybe don't have a lot of resources, to more affluent organizations that have very mature programs, and everything along the spectrum in between. And we find, though, in the end, there are common needs and common features as we balance the need to be open and welcoming, at the same time being safe in our houses of worship. These are challenges we all face every day, every week. Myself and my colleague here, we are engaged with our local law enforcement agencies, the District of Columbia Police, Montgomery County Police in Maryland, and Fairfax County Police in Virginia are 3 of but about 15 that we deal with on a regular basis, along with our federal partners. We work with the ADL very closely. Our local ADL reps we talk to once or twice a week, coordinating training and outreach and responding to incidents of anti-Semitism around the community as well. We spend a lot of time brokering those conversations between different parts, different players in this team effort we have for safety and security in our communities, arranging conversations, town halls with that include members of local law enforcement, staff from ADL, staff from the JCRC, very closely aligned with their JCRC here. Their local JCRC director has been a great ally in leveraging state and local funds to help with security programs in our community. It's, as all my colleagues have said before, it is a team effort. Everybody brings something to the table, and we're all going to succeed by working together on this. The most important player in that team, though, is the individual organization, the synagogue, the agency, the day school, the JCC. Having that level of engagement from both the leadership and membership of those organizations are critical. That's where it begins, at that grassroots level. And the SEN team, with Grant right there on the forefront in Indianapolis, is there to help you find the right people, get the right training to people, get the right information and skills and preparation, so we'll have a safe and secure community. With that, I'd like to turn it over to my colleague in Portland, Gene Moss.
Thank you, Robert. Good evening, everybody. So I'm fortunate to be the cleanup batter, and so many of my colleagues have already graciously stated a lot of information that honestly would be a repeat for me. Just a little bit about myself and the Portland Jewish community. So I've been employed by SCN for 11 months. Stuart was very kind as being our first to provide me training and insights for the community here in Portland and Southwest Washington. We have about 40,000 people in our community, just in the Portland metro area, and about 40 organizations. The only real thing I would add for your community that Grant is now going to be providing his leadership from a security standpoint is, you know, most of us have come from a fairly significant law enforcement leadership background, and with that, and where I think your community is going to benefit by Grant is our capacity for building and maintaining growing relationships. Those are so very important. At least they have been for me in the Portland, and that's Portland, Oregon, not Portland, Maine. So in Portland, it's been really important to build those relationships within the community, because, you know, that's where we are able to collaborate with our community stakeholders, like it's been said of my colleagues, but then also having been in executive level law enforcement leadership like Grant and my colleagues on this panel, we also understand the great value of being able to have resources at our disposal, which Grant will be able to reach out to Robert or Stuart, myself, Mark, many other of our colleagues. And when you're encountering a challenge, there's resources that you can contact for, you know, solutions and ideas on how to problem solve that we can take back into our various communities. So I'm very excited for your community to be able to leverage grant as well as SCN to help with safety and security, and keep our communities vigilant without being hyper vigilant. Thank you. Back to Mark, I guess.
Yeah. So, and I think the next slide is Q&A. Great. So just a couple of quick notes. If you guys do have any questions, again, please put them in the Q&A section in the Zoom call. There should be a little button for Q&A. Feel free to type something in there. One of the things that I didn't mention, and this leads into one of the first questions that we got, was, none of this, obviously none of this is possible without the participation in the community, and, the hunger for this and the rallying around this from the community. But more so, or rather, I would be remiss if I didn't mention the leadership from the Federation. I've worked with dozens of federations across the U.S., and we have a saying, that, if you've seen one federation, you've seen one federation. And so every single federation has, unique leadership and unique approach to security. And there's a different approach across every single one based on size, based on community participation. But one of the things that's been very valuable for me as I've been working with various federations is to experience the different types of leadership. And just in my short time and working with the Federation leadership, Debbie and Jeff, it's been an absolutely amazing experience. And I can tell you, I can't tell you how committed they are. I can't put into words how committed the Federation is and the Federation leadership is to this program and to bolstering the security program for the Indianapolis community. And it's just, it's fantastic to witness and be a part of. And with that, and not that it will happen in this same manner, but I'm gonna ask Robert to touch on slightly. The question, Robert, was with COVID-19 crisis, how will we pay for the investment in our security infrastructure? And if you can talk a little bit about just the process of the task force, and again, prefacing this with the fact that it doesn't always happen this way, but if you can give a little example of how there's, how you've come together from a low cost, no cost perspective, as well as a for cost option in investing in the infrastructure of security for organizations, and how that's rolling forward and some of the ideas around that, Robert.
Yes, sir. Our task force spent its 6-month period looking at the needs across the community, and we did tier things up. What are the most urgent things? What are the quick wins we can do that are low cost or no cost? Try to tier that up with what level of fundraising would be required to support larger efforts going forward. And as it just briefed out its report recently, it tiered up some very immediate things that could be done. Even in the COVID-19 era, the first thing we're working on is just getting a community security committee organized, engaged, and charter to be able to roll out of this current situation into more normal operations a little bit later in the year to really tee up those things. Some of the other immediate low-cost things we talked about was investment in training. Using the staff we have, what more training can we do for the community? How can we communicate that better? And that's the third thing, is how to use our existing communications platform more effectively. We have Scan Alert, SCN Alert as a tool for pushing out information, urgent information, and providing us a means to maintain an email list of security POCs. As you can imagine, with a very large community like this, we've had some challenges getting people registered and keeping that fresh. So we're looking at ways of revisiting how we message that out, make sure people are aware of the tool and how to use it, and that we have the appropriate people from each organization registered, so we can push these notifications out as quick and as widely as we can.
And then from the infrastructure portion, obviously there's the NSGP, the National Nonprofit Security Grant Program. Again, a lot of you are probably already familiar with this. But the additional approaches to a task force to raising money, to identifying what those needs are from a forecast perspective, from a forecast option, and potentially raising money to be able to provide those items for the community based on usage, based on need, and based on just really addressing the threat directly, whatever that may be in your community at the time. Another question, and I'm going to touch on this one, and then Stuart, I'm going to pass one over to you. Communication protocol. So, Robert just touched on SCN Alert, mass communications. That is one layer of the communication protocol that we put into place everywhere we go. And what that is identifying 2 to 3 contacts at every organization that will be in charge of their organization's communication, disseminating everything down. But once we've identified them, ultimately they would most likely be a part of the larger community security committee. But being able to pass everything from threat-based information to a crisis and immediately sending information via text, email, cell phone, recorded call, getting everyone to group together, as well as gathering metrics to be able to say who's answered, is everyone safe, accountability, checking in. These are platforms that come with the program, and Grant will be very quickly installing them. I know he was onboarded to that program today, and that's something that he's going to be working on in the early weeks of developing this program. So, but one of the parts of that communication that's super important is that we have the players on the back end. So, those representatives from each organization that have been trained and understand how to communicate that information to their various members, their congregants, in such a way that it's actionable and in such a way that it's accepted to the point where everyone knows exactly what their respective responsibility is. One of the questions that we get when we do active threat training all the time is, well, my organization doesn't have this, or we don't lock the doors, or we want to be warm and welcoming, and all of these questions about the facility, about the organization. And it's important to remember that, every single person has a role, and at its most core is, what is it that you are going to do? Because what you do matters, and as long as you know what you're going to do, then spread that out and look at the organization and as a whole come together with that plan. So there's more to come on that, and crisis communications plans and outreach and establishing all those contacts. So that's on its way. That's something that you're definitely going to be seeing in the very near future. Stuart, there's a question here about forming security committees and how that representation is identified, and how you form a security committee within each organization, how you work with them to form that. Can you touch on that a little bit?
Sure. Forming a security committee is a unique experience because it's one of the only experiences in Jewish communal life when we get to bring organizations from across the spectrum of religious points of view, and we sit at the same table and we put aside theological differences, and we put aside whether this is coming from the Reconstructionist, the Orthodox, Conservative, Reform, Chabad, what have you. We all sit around the table and we share one priority, and that priority is human life, is doing whatever we have to do to ensure the future of the Jewish community in Indianapolis. And I have yet to run into a community where underrepresentation, overrepresentation was an issue. My rule of thumb is 2 to 3 representatives from each agency. I always want a professional because at the end of the day, the professionals are going to be executing the vision. I like lay leadership, which usually is a board chair or a board member, and then one additional. Different communities run their security committees in different manners. In some committees, the board acts as a board of directors with fiduciary responsibility. In Memphis, it's a sounding board. In Memphis, it's a direction board, and it is the most important vehicle that we have to message what the community security director and the Federation are doing to the people that we're really trying to reach, down to our families. When you have to message, like Mark mentioned, active threat mitigation, when we want to message what we want people to do, getting the rabbis that are sitting in the chair at our security committee that message, and they're able to talk about it from the Bima every Shabbat. Our Jewish community, our JCRC directors, our JCC directors. I mean, these people re-message our brand for us, and that's critical. Equal representation is simple. One agency, one vote. And I have yet to see an issue where that has become a stuck point or a sticking point with respect to direction. I hope that answered the question.
And another question that's coming here, I'm actually going to point one to you, Grant, and I'll head some of this in the beginning. The question is Grant's position inward facing primarily, and how will he leverage his longstanding relationship with law enforcement agencies throughout the state and nation? I can tell you right off the bat, Grant's position is definitely outward facing. It is out in front of the community. We like to go out and put our arms around every organization and touch every organization and touch every member of the community. With that, Grant, we've talked about a lot of different ways, but if you want to talk to a couple of different ways that you're going to be touching the community during this COVID-19 environment, and then, maybe some of your plans moving forward.
Yeah, I think, again, it's kind of ironic that in the current environment, being forced to operate in virtually can actually make us more efficient, at least in developing initial relationships, in my efforts to develop initial relationships around the community. So that's what I'm going to be focused on. You've heard every one of these panel members talk about a couple of different things, kind of repeatedly, a couple of different concepts. One is relationships, the importance of relationships in the context of a security culture within this community, and the other is community ownership. And those are a couple of things that you're going to hear repeatedly from me as I work with Debbie and Jeff and the rest of the team at the Federation to move forward on this program. The importance of relationships and the importance of ownership of the community. As far as inward facing or outward facing, and this has been touched on by a number of the panelists as well, the relationships that this community has outside, if you're talking about outward facing, outside of the Jewish community and in the broader community in Indianapolis and outside of the Indianapolis area, actually, those relationships are extremely important as well. So I'll be focused inward and outward, kind of from day one. Obviously, I've got a lot of work to do in learning the dynamics of this particular community in Indianapolis, which obviously I'm very new to. But again, I think my first 30 to 60 days in the current environment that we're working in, again, can kind of ironically make that a more efficient process in many ways. So that's going to be my focus: relationship building inside the house and outside of the house as appropriate, and pitching a message throughout the community, as others have on the panel, of community ownership of this program.
Another question, Gene, I'm going to toss this one to you. Can you give a few examples of community trainings and some of the things that you've trained as far as some of our core trainings that you've offered, and some of the results and some of your experiences with that?
Absolutely. So we at SCN offer a variety of training subjects, training and education for communities, whether it be active threat response, situational awareness training, stop the bleed training, usher greeter training, and then also, again, getting back to what I said earlier about us being able to collaborate with one another and our colleagues, is that we can also take some of these training principles and modify them to meet the needs. I know recently Stuart and I were speaking about how can you take an usher greeter training and modify it, still meeting the principles of the training curriculum, to then provide to maybe support staff when they're greeting people that are coming into different organization offices, receptionists, and using some of those principles. We have had some great success with our active threat mitigation training. And then again, it's a couple different prongs. We provide training to our community members that might deviate just slightly to the training we would provide to some of our day school staff. Because again, when you have children, you have some different nuances with baby ducklings, as an example, compared to, say, adults, right? So we also have been fortunate to, SCN has been able to negotiate with some vendors for different access and pricing on different equipment. Maybe it's medical equipment like stop the bleed kits as an example. And so oftentimes when we will provide that kind of a training on stop the bleed, we will also provide not just the PowerPoint presentation, but then also the hands-on, which is really the important part to get that muscle memory, if you will, for all of our attendees for our training classes, where they are going to, using the example of stop the bleed, they're going to put on tourniquets, or they're going to utilize and practice with certain pieces of equipment, just like if we were going to practice a active threat drill, we would have people stand up maybe from their seats and actually go through a couple of different processes. So it's very interactive, which we have found to be very successful for our communities for retention.
So there's another question that I'm going to address here, as far as how will communication of issues that affect different communities be addressed. One of the things that I didn't mention was the existence of SCN's intelligence and duty desk. We have a 24/7 duty desk that is manned by intelligence analysts and very qualified individuals. And part of that is taking in information from communities around the nation, not just communities where SCN is embedded, but communities without security directors and communities with security directors that are hired directly by the Federation. Taking in that information, threat-based information, issues that they face, tracking trends, and then pushing that back out on a national scale to every single federation, to every single security director, so that we can track those things, see what's going on in other communities, and communicate that out and say, hey, look, we've seen a trend of this in the Northeast, and that may be something that we can address here before it trends here. To include monitoring of would-be bad actors and chat rooms and chat boards, to be able to pull that information and any threat that may present itself, to be able to analyze and work with local law enforcement as well as national law enforcement. And I can tell you, just in my a little over a year with SCN, I have seen SCN be a part of some of these investigations on a national scale to address and stop a threat or a bad actor before they're able to actually act. And it's been extremely successful, and part of that information sharing, and this is why we pull people like Grant into the position to be able to leverage his background, his colleagues, his existing relationship with law enforcement to be able to head those off. It's not just about preparing the community; it's also about protecting the community and working in some prevention protocols and response. Looking at the questions here, Debbie, how are we doing on time? I know you guys have a couple of things you want to cover here, so.
We've got time for one or two more questions.
Okay. Just to address a quick question here as far as how does Indy compare in size? Well, Indy is an intermediate size federation, and we're looking at a number of 25 to 30 facilities, give or take. We vary in size across the nation. Robert has a little over 300 organizations and facilities in the National Capital Region. Gene, I think you have roughly 50 to 60 in Portland. And Stuart, I think you have 15 to 20 in Memphis. And so while we range in size and range in the number of facilities and the population that we work with, our best practices and our approach doesn't change. And we've been able to employ these with success. And the speed at which we can get out to these organizations. And I can tell you in some of the larger communities, as well as some of the smaller communities, the advantage to the team and having all of us, within reach is, if Grant wants to, if the community and the Federation and Grant want to hold a community-wide training, we did this in Baltimore where the entire team flew in. We put in, was it, Stuart, I think it was 24 hours of training classes. And the community came in, attended training. I think I saw Stuart give an active threat training 5 times to the point where he lost his voice by the end of that. But we trained from 7 a.m. to midnight as any community, and it didn't matter if there was one person in the room or 400 people in the room. So things like this. So regardless of size, our approach, it doesn't waver. going through the questions here. Again, if we don't get to your question, we will definitely use it in a communication outward to make sure we get to everybody's question here. As far as what is SCN seeing during the crisis, during the COVID-19 crisis in relationship to security of the Jewish community and its institutions, I'll actually pass this around to all of my colleagues. Look, there's obviously a lot of chatter, and you'll see a lot in the media about people exploiting the COVID-19 crisis and would-be bad actors, white supremacists, white nationalists, being able to say, okay, well, here's what we're going to do, and the threats. And you'll see some of these in the media that goes out there. We focus on taking that information, communicating it to the community after we've verified that it is a credible threat. And we are very, very careful to make sure that we let everyone know, look, if we're hearing this, whether it's credible or uncredible, whether it's a direct threat to the community or is not a direct threat to the community, and making sure that we inform you without causing needless panic. There's always going to be a threat. There's always going to be an issue, and there's always going to be, unfortunately, someone that has a problem with the Jewish community or any other community for that matter. We focus on vetting these threats and vetting this information and acting accordingly to make sure that we are able to address it. So some of the efforts that we are making, such as giving the proper information for how to secure your facility. I'll let Robert touch on that for a second before I pass it around. But things to do now, things you can start thinking of between recovery and how to secure your facility and how to communicate. So Robert, if you just want to go ahead and touch on one or two things, pass it to Gene and pass it to Stuart, anything you guys are seeing or anything you guys are doing during the COVID-19 crisis.
One of the things important now that most of our facilities are closed is not forgetting about them. Think about those basic crime prevention things, checking our facilities on a regular basis, having a member of your staff double check that everything is still secure, that there's been no damage, graffiti, that alarms, if they're in place, are active and still functioning. We want to check that on a regular basis and make sure our team, the team in the organization that uses the facility, the synagogue or agency, is aware of the current status of the facility. And that's also coordinated with the local law enforcement to let them know what your business status is. Do you have staff coming in periodically because there's still urgent tasks that need to be done, or is it completely shut down? Your local police or sheriff's office should know your status. So when they make their patrols, they're aware when something is amiss. Moving forward, though, we're also going to have to start thinking about, hopefully, in a few weeks, how we get back in there, how we peel back all those measures we took to shut down our organizations to move back up, into how we may have to stage that in, make sure our security posture returns to the right level as we begin to move in and start our operations again. Any organization may not go to 100% overnight. You may have to phase in what you're doing, the services you're providing, the parts of the community you're engaging with. You may have to prioritize that as you bring your staff back on. If you're an organization that's had to lay off some staff, you're going to have to look at, can we re-recruit, bring those same people back? Do we have disgruntled staff because of it? And we need to be thinking about the kinds of things that we may have to do to mitigate if we have disgruntled staff. If you've closed down your facility completely, you have an automated access control system. It'd be good to lock out anybody you don't expect to be going in there, you don't believe has the need to go in there on any given day. And if we have laid off staff, is revoking their access as well. If the staff's just furloughed, we think we're bringing them back, maybe we don't want to revoke, just suspend. But nevertheless, we want to make sure we're controlling access to our facilities now and going forward. With that, I'll kick it over to Stuart to see what thoughts you may have.
Sure. Counterintuitively, this is actually a really good time to be onboarding a community security director. And I say that because so many of the threats that we're seeing now come from the cyberspace. So many of the threats that we're seeing now against the Jewish community come from social media, come from intrusions now we're seeing into the online space where our federations are holding meetings, where our Jewish communities are holding meetings, whether that's Zoom or Skype or whatnot. The threats to the Jewish community have not stopped because our doors are temporarily closed. Threats to the Jewish community continue online. traditional anti-Semitic tropes such as scapegoating is one of the largest trends that our analysts at our duty desk are seeing. And the reason I say that counterintuitively, this is a fantastic time to be onboarding a security director is because any security director, and your security director in particular, is going to be very skilled at not only triaging and intaking those complaints and those occurrences, but making sure that they get to the proper law enforcement authorities. There's difference in local, state, and federal law enforcement. Everybody has a swim lane that they work in, and Indianapolis is in a really good position with the security director you're onboarding now to make sure that that suspicious information does not become kinetic and is dealt with and mitigated in the most expeditious and professional manner.
That's great. Well, we are at our time, so I want to just take a moment to thank you, Grant, Mark, Stuart, Robert, and Jean, for answering so many of our questions tonight and for kicking us off with so much information. I have to take a moment also to thank my colleague, Jeff Lincoln, who has been working on this initiative for close to 2 years. And so we all owe him a debt of gratitude. Thank you. We are so excited for this program to hit the ground running. You know, my kids would say amazeballs instead of excited. You know, the next step is for us to all come together to financially support this initiative, but we need your help. Your contribution will enable us to invest additional resources in security professionals, training, and protocols needed to keep our community prepared and safe. Thank you all for joining us tonight. I'm going to pass it over to Beth to wrap us up.
Thanks, Debbie. We have a page on our website at www.jewishindianapolis.org/security. And that is got more information on our Safe Indy program that you've just heard about and how you can donate. Just I want to share anecdotally, Steve and I have donated additional funds on top of our annual campaign contribution. And I really hope you all can consider that donation and as you gleaned tonight, the importance of security to our community. It's been great to virtually connect with all of you. We hope to see you this coming week at our next virtual community meeting on Monday, April 6th at 7 p.m. where we're going to have another panel discussion and the topic is going to be public health protocols in our community. Have a great rest of the evening. Stay safe and healthy, everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Beth. Thank you, everyone.